start that early. Yes, it sounds a little aggressive.
Very space out.
It's 11, not 11:30, right?
But yeah, that's why I kind of crossed it out. We
I
advertise-
can't see it like that. Not that I'm gonna stand up here, but he may be able to see it better. 11.
Yeah, two people signed.
No, I can carry it back out with me. Who's here? What council members besides you?
John and Mel,
Where's Melanie?
right there, by Chief.
Oh, they're all hiding. Okay. Right. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. Glad to see a crowd. I just want to get it started. I know everybody's got their day to move on to. I'm Mayor Susan Sample. And again, welcoming everybody and thanking you for taking time to come to today's town hall meeting about the facilities master plan. I want to thank other council members who are here because you may have questions afterwards. We've got Shannon Carroll. Raise your hand if people want to see you. She's standing in the back. John Barnes back there. Melanie Bell. Our Mayor Pro Tem, John Montgomery, sends his regrets that he could not be here today. I'll give you a little background. We started this master plan process in order to develop a long-term plan for cities' facilities. Some of our buildings, and I know some of you have toured them, were built in the 40s and 50s. And not that that's not a wonderful era, and we take great care of our buildings, but time has passed and the community's changed and the needs have changed on some of them. And it's become clear that some of the buildings have deficiencies that have to be addressed in order to enhance the services to the residents and make it a place where employees can work. And before investing in the existing facilities, we wanted to take time to develop a clear plan, work with experts who we have here, and engage with our residents to see what you would like for our community. We'll also engage with the employees too to see what they can live within. We'll be starting with a presentation from the city's architectural consultant, Jeff Gerber, who's here with PGAL, who will provide an overview of the options identified in the process so far. You saw pictures out in the hall. I hope everybody took time to look at them, and they'll still be out there afterwards, and they're online as well. Most importantly, we want to hear from you today. Council wanted to hold this town hall to get resident feedback on this important process. For those of you who submitted comment cards, and I think we may have a couple, we'll be addressing those after the opening presentation. And afterwards, we'll take some time to give you the opportunity to walk around again, look at the maps and exhibit and speak with staff or with our architectural consultant about any questions you might have or suggestions. And I want to emphasize that these town hall meetings are just the first steps of a process. Implementing a master plan takes years. Probably well past any term I might have in office. And there will be more meetings during this process. Anytime a building would go online or major changes, we would come back for something like this. And keep in mind the drawings you see also are not final look or feel of the buildings. The design, look and feel for any buildings would happen at a later time with significant resident input and working with the architect. Thanks again for coming, and take time to have a snack afterwards and chat with us. With that, Dave's going to speak, our city manager. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. For you, those that don't know me, I'm Dave Beach, I'm the city manager. And I just want to also echo the mayor's comments and welcome you to the town hall today. I also want to thank the council and staff's effort to get us to this point. It was crucial in the process. As Mayor Sample stated, the goal of this process is to establish a long-term plan for the location and the function of our facilities. As such, staff has been working with consultants, PGAL, over the past 8 months to complete a needs assessment. to identify current and future staffing levels, any needed changes to facilities that would enhance the level of services provided to residents. Along the way, council has discussed the master plan at 3 meetings to provide feedback and update the public. All of us at the city are excited to be able to use this dedicated town hall to discuss the project in depth with you. I would like to emphasize that the purpose of the master plan is to identify the needs and the location of the facilities. The maps you see do not represent the design of any buildings, as the mayor said. They are mass studies to evaluate whether a structure or not accommodating the city's projected needs will fit on a certain site. Whether it's 1-story, 2-story, that'll come during the preliminary design process when you start meeting with the stakeholders. Determining location is just the first step along the way of establishing and implementing the plan on behalf of the entire community. So thank you again. And Jeff Gerber with PGAL will go through it.
Thanks, Dave. Again, my name is Jeff Gerber with PGAL, and I've got Juan Garcia here who's been helping me with these exhibits. And so as has been stated, so we've been working with the city and the stakeholders on this facilities master plan for several months. We've had lots of different meetings reviewing the conditions of the buildings, trying to determine what the appropriate sizes of these facilities need to be into the future so that we can provide options for the city to consider. We did develop a number of options besides what you're going to see today. And for various reasons, those were not deemed to be as appropriate as the finalists, which we're going to talk about today. So we started out with some objectives for the facilities master plan. And again, a master plan, as everyone has said, is not a design. We're not here to present final designs for anything. We're really here to try to provide a tool for the city to create a roadmap about how to manage your long-term facility requirements. One is to try to figure out how big they need to be and are they in the right spot, and then to make recommendations about how to get you there over some period of time, which could be, a year, could be, 20 years, could be 50 years. So some of our objectives for this master plan was to determine where the ultimate location should be for each of these facilities. And the reason we want to do that, as has been stated, is that if you have a long-term plan for a facility to be replaced, then you might not invest in a renovation to the level that you might if it was going to be the final location for a long time. For example, you wouldn't put a new roof on a building that you were planning on tearing down in 5 years because a roof is theoretically a 20-year improvement and you wouldn't get the full value out of that. You might choose a different path. And so part of this analysis is really to help the city to make short-term decisions about how to manage your facilities and to make improvements to make them functional until such time as the city decides to do a different approach. Some of the factors that were considered for some of these facility decisions, one is the security situation in each of the facilities. There has been some studies done that determine what are the changing security requirements for public facilities. As you know, we're in a very dynamic period in the world right now about where security is a very important component of how that translates into physical conditions of buildings and which buildings and sites are as appropriate for protecting both the public and the users of those buildings. Same thing with facility vulnerabilities. The expectations for the citizens should be that when you need the facilities to be open in a hurricane or a storm, they should be open, and are they appropriately constructed so that they can withstand what would be a normal kind of storm, so that they can provide their function for the citizens when you need them, whether you have a flood or a hurricane or any of those types of events. Also, the age and expected life cycle of the buildings are a factor. Buildings do have a life cycle by which they start to fail. The primary systems start to fail, and so that's always a consideration. And then program needs. So program is, well, what's in the building and how is it used? Does it still meet those functions? We're going to talk about some specifics, challenges in some of the components of the city's facilities here in a minute. But program changes as the needs of the citizens change over time. That the city responds to those changes, whether it be in different kinds of programs or different types of staffing levels. And so the program needs for these buildings was also a factor in this facilities master plan. Location versus the service requirements. Is the facility located where it will best serve the citizens, whether it be to access it to come pay your bills or to access it for however else to get a building permit or whatever other access that the citizens have for these different facilities. And there's always a cost of the improvements factor that is a consideration for these as well. So the facilities that were considered to be part of the master plan, not all of the city buildings were, but most of them were. So the city hall, which is the building we're in today, was considered, as well as the fire and police department, which are in this building as well. The Public Works Administration and Community Development, which are in a building across the street, were part of the plan. The rest of the public works functions, the operations, the water, sewer, solid waste, facilities maintenance, and the fleet maintenance functions, which are all located here in City Center, were part of this plan. The treatment plant, which is not part of City Center, was not part of the facilities plan. That's handled under a different planning tool from the city. Animal Services, which is currently over at the treatment plant, was part of the facilities plan. The community building, senior center, was part of the facilities plan, as well as the library and the recreational facilities. As has been mentioned, we've had a number of meetings, not only with the city stakeholders, but also with city council. We held 3 different workshops where various drafts of options were presented to city council for feedback. And this slides kind of summarize the feedback that was received during those council workshops. There was a desire to retain certain key functions within City Center. That included the EOC, the fire department, police department, the IT functions, the library, community building, and senior center were all expressed to remain within City Center. There was a desire to have the facilities and operations connected so that they work to the benefit of the citizens, so that they would continue to be convenient for the citizens. There was a desire for the city hall to remain in this building, which is where it is today. There was a desire to consider whether or not to have a library, community building, and senior center as a common facility rather than having different structures. There was a desire to replace the fire station rather than reconstructing here in this building. And so I want to pause and talk about that for a second. So I talked about the changing program that happens over time. This building was built several decades ago and was designed around what the fire department's requirements were at that time, has been improved a couple different times. But one of the big challenges with the fire department is the apparatus space. That they were designed for fire apparatus that were available back in the 50s that were used back then. Fire apparatus continue to get larger. They get bigger and wider and taller. And there are challenges with the apparatus space, with your equipment now, and how they are allowed for the people to get in and get out, and to be able to maintain those facilities and the equipment inside of those apparatus space. So one of the considerations was to tear down the apparatus space and build them bigger in place. And the second challenge with the fire department is that the living quarters are located on the second floor. They don't have access to an elevator there, which is no longer acceptable. And so any improvement to a fire station would also require an elevator to be installed in this building to access the fire. There's also a number of other deficiencies, such as other that are commonly found in fire stations today, decontamination spaces to allow the equipment and the people to, when they come back from a call, to cleanse so that they don't bring those contaminants back into the building or take them home with themselves. So there's a number of challenges with the fire situation. And so the recommendation or the comments from council was when we looked at what do we have to do to fix it in the building here, that you're basically being very disruptive to the operation. So there was a stated desire to replace the fire station rather than trying to reconstruct it here in City Hall. There was also a desire to consider options for relocating the public works functions out of city center. That would include the public works operations, water, sewer, solid waste, facilities maintenance, the fleet maintenance. And all of those functions are located here in city center, across the street and across the street of Milton. There was a desire to move those out of city center at the point where they need to be replaced. And there was also a desire to consider including a recycle center in a new public works campus. So I'm going to talk about, we have two different options that were developed for a public works campus that is outside of city center. This one is called Public Works Option Number 1. This is on a piece of property that the city of Westview currently owns. It is in the city of Houston. It's not in the city of West University Place. So any development over here would have to comply with the city of Houston requirements, building codes, ordinances, all of those types of things. This site, you might recall, it was the previous location of your recycle center, which is located over here, or was located in this part of the site. So this is West Park. Here, this is Dinkins. So your property is kind of an L-shaped property. And this option shows the square footage that would be required to replace the facilities in city center currently, as well as the animal shelter, which shows up in the blue box. And then it also includes the number of parking spaces required to accommodate the employees, as well as all the fleet vehicles that the city has, plus all the equipment that is parked currently either over in city center or in other locations around the city. So all of these parking spaces that are located here are the right number to accommodate your current and expected growth in that equipment and vehicles. There's also a consideration for a fuel station over here as opposed to the one that's located over here in city center. So we did pros and cons on these options. You can see that this that all of those functions that would be required do fit on this site. However, in any new development within the city of Houston requires new detention for stormwater, containing stormwater on site. And you can see that there's no available land to outside of what's required for program to have an open ditch detention pond, which is what you would do the most economical way to approach detention. So in this particular option, we would have to provide underground detention. And so the assumption into this area is that there would be an underground detention that would be located somewhere in this part of the site that would be paved over and would accommodate the city of Houston's detention requirement for this kind of a development. So the pros for option 1 is that going down this path allows for this new campus to be constructed while your existing facilities remain in operation in city center. So there's no loss of operation to the city or the citizens throughout any part of the project. They would just, whenever this facility gets finished, they would just move from one to the other. So there'd be no loss of operation. This option also uses city-owned property, so there's no land acquisition required. Some of the cons for this option is that it does require underground detention. That is fairly much more costly than a surface detention pond, which we'll talk about in a minute. And this site, as it's configured now, would not accommodate the recycle center in addition to these required public work options. So that would have to be some other location. And the site is pretty compact, and there really isn't much room for any future expansion that might happen as some new public works need gets developed at some point in the future from the city's perspective. So we did put a budget estimate on each of these options. You see it up here on the right side. And so when we talk about budgets for options, we do those in today's dollars. And it not only includes the construction costs, but it also includes all of the other costs that the city would incur in going down the path of a new project. It includes contingencies and soft costs and furniture and things of that nature. So when I'm showing you costs, those are total project costs, not just construction costs. So just keep that in mind. So the cost of this particular option is $10,650,000. The second option is using the city-owned property, but if I go back to option one, there is this parcel right here that the city currently does not own. It's currently a parking lot over there, and the option two. Sorry, getting touchy fingers here. Option two is that the city would purchase that piece of property, would develop it with the same elements. So it's the same building size, it's the same number of parking spaces, same animal shelter, but the site then allows for an open ditch surface detention pond. So you wouldn't pay the premium of a underground detention pond in this option. And so there would be less cost for that piece. Obviously, you have to buy land, which is also a consideration. So the pros for this option is the same as in option one, that this option will allow the current public works operations to remain functional through the whole point of construction, so you wouldn't lose service of those. Another pro is that it allows the open detention, which is the most economical way of doing detention. It does provide the opportunity to have some future expansion, which at the point where you did that, you might have to put underground detention in to accommodate that. And you could also include the recycle center here. If you wanted to, you would have to provide underground detention for a portion of it, but it could also be located on the site if there's enough land here to do that. One of the obvious con to this option is it requires additional property acquisition. And so that is a factor as well. So the estimated project budget for this option is a little bit lower. It's $9,430,000. The reason that is lower, it's really the difference in cost of a underground detention pond to a surface detention pond. Obviously, you need to add whatever the cost of the land is in order to get a total project cost for this option. We also looked at city center, as I mentioned, and this is what we're calling city center option number one. And this is an option where there is a new fire station that is located on the site where the community building and library currently sit, over in this area, around Rice and Auden. The replacement of the library community center, senior center, would be on the site where the current public works admin is and some of the operational functions which are currently reside in this zone now. And then where the current fleet maintenance facility is over in this area, that could be converted to additional parking or some other use that the city wants to have, but we're showing it here as additional parking as well. So the existing city hall, which is located here in the pink color, would have all of the same functions, except in the current fire spaces, the public works administration and community development would move into city hall, and we would repurpose some of the fire station spaces, so we wouldn't have to rebuild them. We would just build them out with interior build out to accommodate those spaces, as well as the IT department, which is currently located over here off of Milton, would be located in the city hall as well. Again, the building doesn't get expanded. It just has portions of it that get repurposed from what the fire apparatus space would no longer be, vehicle spaces. We turn those into built out habitable space, and then utilize the upstairs living quarters for other city functions as well. So that city hall stays in its current situation, and obviously the two water tanks are located here as well. The current pump room that supports these two water tanks is in an existing building located right here. There is a defined need for that pump room to be replaced and updated, which is part of another city program. So we always want to talk about how would that play into this master plan as well. So this particular option contemplates that that new pump room, whenever it's required, would stay in the same location. It would just be rebuilt in the same site. So just reading this map, the tan pieces are the parking spaces that the city owns. This currently is a vacant lot, but could be converted to park. Is a residence that the city purchased, but it could be turned into additional parking should there be determined to be a need for that to be the case. Again, so you see that there are also spaces that the city has a shared parking agreement with the church, which is this parking lot expansion over here off of City Hall, as well as the lot over here. So I'm showing those are not city-owned properties. So the pros for this option is that the new library and community building could be constructed while the existing facilities remain in operation. So under this scenario, once Public Works gets out of the way, the library community center could be constructed here while the existing library community center stays in operation in its current location. The next, so it could remain completely functional. All those programs could remain in place. There'd be no interruption of services for any of that during the whole construction. Following that, then the fire station, which we're showing located over here on Auden and Rice, would be able to be constructed. And so again, the existing fire department would remain in this building until a new building is built. So there'd be no loss of service for the fire department. They would be fully operational the whole time. And then the last piece would be that the city hall would be repurposed in the space that the fire department would have vacated. So with that sequence, that there is no loss of service for the library community building as well as the fire station. And so we think those are pros to this approach. And another pro is that this, because we're adding additional city-owned parking, that this maximizes the parking capability within city center. We know that at different times during the day and at different times of the year that parking in city center is a real challenge, and that that having additional capability of parking could be beneficial to the city. And one of the cons is that you would still rely upon some of the shared parking in order to satisfy the full parking requirement. The budget estimates for this option is that the cost of reconstructing a new fire station is $11 million. The cost of a new community building, senior center, and library is $10,720,000 located over here. And then the renovation of the city hall is $5.5 million in that range. So we created a second city center option, which is exactly the same, except for in this option, rather than putting the pump room over in the current location, that potentially it could go over in where the fleet maintenance currently is, somewhere over in that area, which would provide the ability to either have more flexibility for this or to create some additional green space around the library community center. All of the other functions are the same, as well as the costs. These are all the same components. The pros and cons are also the same as in option one. The only difference is whether the pump room is in its current location here or whether it gets constructed somewhere else. And we think over in this area is probably the best other alternative. So when we were contemplating city center, we saw the opportunity for some additional enhancements. that could happen at some point. One of those is to provide the ability to have a more pedestrian process on Milton and Amherst, that potentially some of the street parking could be converted to either additional green space or make it more pedestrian friendly with wider sidewalks, and still provide the one-way traffic in both directions. So we saw it as an opportunity because we know there's a lot of traffic that goes up and down these streets, kids walking to school or for after school activities over here at the ball fields. And we thought that might be an opportunity for some improvement to make that more pedestrian friendly as another option, which, you could always, partially close some of these streets, or you could just make the sidewalks, or make the space just have more green space. So this slide is a summary slide of the costs, just so they're all in one place. These are the same numbers that you saw on the other slides. With Public Works option number 1, this is the $10,650,000. The second option, which is $9,430,000, but you have to also consider the cost of the land for the 2 Public Works options. And then in the city center, both of the options had the same cost structure for the community center, library, senior center, fire station, and city hall renovation. We are not including anything on the pump room because that's still being conceptualized under another city study. So you kind of see the range of the total. I will point out these are all estimated in today's dollars. And obviously these all can't be done at the same time. So some of them would have to be pushed out, like I contemplated the sequencing. So any escalation costs would have to be added to any projects that would happen, whether that's 5 years out or 10 years out or 20 years out, that would have to be added to. These are all trying to baseline them in what would happen if you did them all at the same time relative to each other, if that makes sense. So this is a attempt to try to communicate that sequencing. This is showing the quickest it could all happen if you decided, the city decided you just need to do them all right now. This shows the Public Works campus that would have to happen first in order to clear out that part of the site to allow for the community building, library, senior center to be constructed. Then would allow the fire station to be constructed when that's done, and then ultimately City Hall. So you can see there is a required sequence, and whether they are that tight together or they're 5 years apart, the sequence I think still makes sense. And I just wanted to make sure that the city understood that doing the fire station first has other ramifications, right? You start to talk about loss of services and other things that might come into play. So we think that this is the right sequence. How far closer apart they are is a different decision for the city. And that's the presentation. Again, I just want to reiterate, we showed you site plans, they're boxes, they kind of look like buildings, but don't consider those design buildings. They're not design buildings. They are the appropriate size for what the program requires. But obviously, at the point where the city wants to go design these, then they would be designed and the building shapes would be configured at that time with as input as has been mentioned before. So with that, I think, Will, you're going to come and address some questions or comments?
Good morning. I'm Will Thompson. I'm the assistant to the city manager. I spoke with most of you as you came in. So I'm going to read out the comments or questions that were submitted earlier. So there are 3 questions for this one. 1, is the Dinkins facility sufficient to house public works? We considered 5 years ago. 2, where would garbage trucks be housed on Dinkins? 3, what is remaining estimated life of public works building on Milton? So for number 1, based on the space analysis and projections from staff and the architect, the Dinkins site is sufficient to house public works, maintenance and operations, as well as parks maintenance. Public works administration and permitting would be moved into this facility under that plan. So for 2, where would garbage trucks be housed on Dinkins? And 3, what is the remaining estimated life of public works building on Milton? I'll defer to the architect.
So in both of the options, like in option 2, back here is where the garbage trucks would park while they're not out performing those functions. And in option 1, it would be in this part of the site here. These are the areas where the spaces are bigger to be able to accommodate the larger vehicles, the trailers, the backhoes, garbage trucks, and of that nature. In terms of life of the public works facilities, the city does a really good job of maintaining facilities, and they're not going to fall down anytime soon. That's not really the issue. The issue is really about being able to accommodate requirements and the needs of the city. There will be a point where every time that you have to replace mechanical units or replace roofs, you have to start to have the conversation, okay, is that worth it to continue to extend the life, and what is the cost of doing so and the benefit of doing so? So I don't think I could tell you that the building is got 1 year left life in it serving the function out, because I think that's what you've been doing. Yeah.
So it's 70 years old.
Jeff. So this card has 3 separate comments. 1, please account for electrical load for EV charging at Public Works, City Hall, and Firehouse. 2, please account for space for city vehicle charging in the future. 3, conversion of city-owned lot by library to parking, compensation to eastward property owner for preceding devaluation. For 1 and 2 regarding EV, electric vehicle charging, those would be design considerations. The object of this particular study is to look at location and functionality. So installation of those sorts of additions would come out in the design process. 3, conversion of city-owned lot by library to parking, compensation to eastward property owner for preceding devaluation. I'll defer to the city manager on that one.
So the city goes through a public process. We've reached out to the property owner. And so about compensation, there'll be a discussion with the property owner about certain things, but that's about where I'll leave it and go from there. So we made the property owner abundantly aware of the process that we're going through.
Did you consider building a new fire station on the university side of City Hall so that you could then retain the optimal location and continue all city functions while the new station was being built? I'll defer to the architect on converting City Hall so that our stations could exit onto university.
I want to make sure I understand the question here. So, and whereabouts are we talking about?
It's City Hall.
Oh,
University side.
talking about over here?
It's we have talked about like on that side of City Hall, like
On-
where
on
the
the-
parking lot, if there's some reason to consider putting a new fire station there, so you can maintain the actual location, still like not necessarily building during
You're talking about right here,
I'm
correct?
talking about right where all the parking is out there, like on.
Yeah. Yeah, so we looked at all scenarios, but what that does is it creates a deficiency of parking then. It exacerbates the parking shortage here at City Hall. And so in parts of this property, the city doesn't own. So could it fit in there? Maybe. But I think the challenge is we talking with the fire chief and others that, you know, their preferences is to be able to access Auden, and just like they do today, and that this was deemed to be a better site for access for the apparatus.
Well, I just want to follow.
Yes.
They offered the opportunity to actually access, like, maybe that's like.
Yeah, I think that,
It's a much bigger and more accessible street that way, so.
I understand. I think that without having additional property here, I think that would be very difficult to do.
As you should, you obviously looked at the facilities master plan through the lens of functionality. Did you also look at it through the lens of sustainability? If so, can you specify how you incorporated sustainability into the plan? So this primarily looked at location and function with regards of sustainable designs and things like that. That would come out in the design process for the buildings themselves. Yes, sir.
Okay, so there's a lot of questions that are going to be on sustainability. The city council is going through, they have a sustainability task force that's looking at issues about how the city is going to be sustainable in the future. So as the city adopts policies regarding sustainability, those will be incorporated into the designs of the buildings, whether that be solar, wind, electrical vehicle charging stations, and as the city builds those facilities, those elements will be incorporated. And so when we look at sustainability, that's a very broad thing. And the purpose of this is the location of the facilities. The city looked at the previous options that came up for review. We looked at reutilizing this building for fire station. The problem is when you rebuild that bay, the roof is higher. Now you have an issue and there's an ADA requirement, and we all could be under the same impression that our firefighters should be, they would not be ADA where they need an elevator or something like that, but that's the requirement, that's the law, and we have to comply with it. So when you rebuild when you tear down and rebuild the fire apparatus bay, now all of a sudden you have a level here to the existing level here to another level here, and you don't have the distance between that to do an elevator, outside of having two elevators, or you get to this ramp, which starts eating up space, and then with the other stairwells. And so when we looked at that, this location from the fire department was the preferred location. The second preferred location was the area on Auden, where the current community building and library is. The third, which was the least preferred, was the public works site. So when you looked at that, the preferred location was here. The preferred building for the fire department is a new building constructed to meet modern day firefighting needs, which Jeff alluded to was a decontamination room, adequate storage, climate control, things like that. Repurposing the space would go. So when we looked to go and look at a building on the university side, as the architect said, basically takes up all the parking. So now you have to park all of the employees plus visitors and how they get to the facility, which would impact it. So it's not a economical or an efficient use of this site. We can argue or debate or be on different sides whether the best building is one that is there and you can repurpose it. I think the city has shown due diligence in repurposing buildings over the last 70 years. We have pushed and pulled the facilities to change with the changes that have come from the service requirements of the residents. So when we look at the public works buildings, they're 70+ years old. Are they gonna fall down? No, they were built under a civil defense grant. But we have pushed, we've added spaces, we have converted carports to a vehicle maintenance space. So can we make them work? Sure. Are they efficient or optimal with their efficiency? No, by no means. So when we look at new facilities, if we can repurpose an old building, great. But the old buildings, the fire station, even if we were to rebuild it has space constraints when you start looking at the modern needs for a fire station. The decontamination room, the old way was for carcinogens that came from fire and those types of things. The new threat that the pandemic has brought is about viral. So when you come back in with your equipment, you go through a cleaning process. Right now, it's in the apparatus bay. It gets tracked in. It can go into the living quarters. There's not that process there. Also with the storage of the equipment, where it's stored is in the fire base. Well, every time you start a vehicle, it has an emission capturing system. And so it goes out, but you still have them backing in and you get those contaminants that go on their gear that they wear. So there's a lot of things that we've looked to push and pull the buildings. And so over the years, the city has gone through a master plan process since I've been here in 2005. It's never fully adopted one. So some of these things we've looked at in the past, it's just never been formulated, but we have some time to come to major reinvestments in the facilities. And before the city council goes and approves the spending of your tax dollars, we want to make sure that we're not coming doing these improvements and you go and spend a couple million and then 5 years later, like, well, we need to move somewhere else. So we wanted to take a very methodical approach to looking at where we believe the buildings can be. And as Jeff mentioned in the council, continuity of service was very important for them. And so that's kind of led to the domino effect. You see public works move. You can then do the library community center. You have no loss of service there. Then you can build the fire station and then the fire station moves. And so you keep that continuity service, because if you go and impact the site, one of the options looked is to redo this whole building here. Well, that was about 30 million. Now you got to rehouse police, fire, utility, and I joked with this on Monday or Tuesday, admin, but how we could go outside the city and no one would be hurt by that. So, but you have to find a place for them all to be. There's added cost to that. There's a disruption of service, and there's also an effect on the service response time for some of the things. And so the sustainability portion, sorry for my long-winded oration here, the sustainability portion will be determined by council as they adopt those policies, and those will be incorporated into the new facilities. Definitely, there's a push to make them more energy efficient. If we can also do with alternative power that can be incorporated into those facilities, that's a win-win. So I'll leave it at that.
So there are two comments on this next one. One, option 2, surface detention space looks much larger versus option 1. Why? 2, fire station replacing library community building requires removal of multiple trees. Why not build fire where library is blocked under the facilities master plan, as I understand it, the current public works admin site, while shutting library for a year, like during COVID, to rebuild and relocate senior services programming to rec center. So for the first one, option 2, surface detention space looks much larger versus option 1. Why? I'll defer to the architect.
Both of those options have the same amount of parking, the same size building. They're different shapes because of the configuration of the sites, but they are the same amount of parking spaces, and the buildings are the same size.
So for the second comment, replacing, putting the fire station under where this current screen you see shows the library and community center, and relocating senior services to the rec center. temporarily. So one of the previous iterations of this plan looked at putting fire at that location. The reality is that it doesn't provide optimal access to an arterial roadway like it does at the Rice and Auden site that you see on the screen, which would add to operational complications for fire and EMS. Relocating senior services temporarily to the rec center. The rec center is currently doesn't have additional programming space to allow for all of the programming needs that the senior program offers.
Can I add something? So one is, as Will said, we did look at lots of different options. One of those was to put the fire station located on this site here. The challenge is both of these streets, as you know, are one way. And so when we discuss this with the fire chief, the concern is loss of response time to any event that happens, because if you have to go over here and you're exiting this way and you got to go this way to go one way to come back this way, those are valuable seconds that are sometimes can turn into loss of life. And so, and same thing, if we came down to Amherst, they'd have to go one way to go back the other way. And so the benefit of being off of Auden or University, if there was enough land over here to do it, is that they can come out and go either direction, which allows them to provide much better service. And because response time is everything for both fire and for EMS, and that's really how we got there. But we did look at that.
And then I'll add on, the final part was, there was a part of what preferred location is on Auden, with the number of people on Auden passing forward, having the fire station there, it's more visible because they do get a lot of walk-ups. And when you put it over there, when they talked about the space, we could reverse the roads, but then you have parking on Amherst or Milton. So there'd have to be those changes, or if you leave it, but then with the school pickup and stuff, those roads, one car, by coming out onto Auden, it's a wider road where you don't have one car blocking a road. So the ambulance or the fire apparatus can still get down to University. To go from Auden to University is a lot different. I'm sorry, from Rice to University on Auden is a way different than trying to come out onto Amherst or Milton and make your way there. So it looks at it from a multiple standpoint, but they'll talk to you about, with all the kids from school, parents and things, there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say public interest, or some discussions that happen more informal, where people just walk up, the firefighters are out, they can get some discussion, have about fire prevention or this or that. So there's that public interaction that happens on Auden that would not happen on the other street.
My concern is that one-story buildings may not provide adequate space for future residents and their needs. Also, senior services and children's library sections need more division. That is the biggest concern. Change of location needs to make sure city center is pedestrian friendly. So I'll take these in order. Whether or not the building is the library and community center, senior center, is a one-story or two-story building, is something that would come out in the design phase. As Dave mentioned earlier, this is a mass study that you see on the screen that shows that in either layout or in a combined layout, that building would fit on that site. So the actual, as the next comment said, the actual division and the actual design of the building would come out in the design process. And during that, because it is such a public facing building, there would be a robust public process with additional town halls as well.
If I could add, so when we look at the buildings, one of the things talking to Jeff was to make sure when we build a structure is that we plan for future growth. So whether it's let's just say one story shows the largest building based upon the projecting needs can't fit on that, whether it's a 1.5, or 2-story, whether it's 2 individual buildings with a connecting foyer. A lot of that will come out in the design study, preliminary design. When you moving it on paper is really easy, and you're meeting with the users. With the library, it'll be with the library district, stuff like that. But all of the buildings that we're going to build is going to plan for how do you grow this building. So we're not having to, you plan for that growth. If you're going to add on services, you know you can go this way or you can go up. So the construction of the building, we won't be in the thing going, we can't add a second story because the first story wasn't built for that. So it'll allow for that planned growth. How? That'll just determine on, 20, 30 years down the road, the change in the community and the demands or their desires, what they want from a services.
And then regarding making sure the city center is pedestrian friendly, as Jeff mentioned earlier, one of the additional considerations for the implementation of a master plan would be looking at pedestrian friendly improvements to both Milton and Amherst in the city center. There are 2 questions on this next card. One, what's the estimated cost for the land to be acquired for public works? 2, where will the budget of $30 to $40 million come from? I will defer to the city manager.
So on the land acquisition cost, that is a good question. So it could be 7, 8, 9, 10 million. It's talking with the property owner and they'll have a price and then there would be a price. So I think a better way to ask that question, what is the acceptable price for the land acquisition by the taxpayer? And we might not, the acceptable price might not match up with what the owner wants. So it's a very vague question because we're in a public meeting. So, but that's the tough part. Where does the cost for these? Well, the city is limited in the ability to generate revenue. So it's either taxes, fees, for services, things like that. So it would be debt service. There'll also be grant funding that we'll be pursuing. Once we have an identified plan, we have identified uses for that. We have an established plan. We can actually actively go out and really start looking for grant funding for some of it, like for the fire station. There's grants out there for public safety. So I will tell you that it'll be a hodgepodge or a mixture of things. The ARPA funds can be used for potentially the senior center, senior services, community building type thing. So that would be part of it. But the majority of it, the lion's share, would be debt service. And what I mean by that is taxes. Sorry.
Can Westview add restrooms for the softball fields? Maybe the scout house could be open during the games. The softball fields and the scout house were not included in this facilities master plan study. There are 4 questions on this next card. One is the land.
On the question about the softball fields and the scout house, opening up a facility that the city, then there would have to be supervision. So if there's a need for restrooms and not walking all the way across, I would talk with the youth leagues to see if they can put over porta potties that would provide restroom access. Because to open up a city facility during the hours of their operation, there have to be supervision in that building. So that's where it becomes a little problematic.
So there are 4 questions this next card. One is the land for sale. Can we?
You answered the question. Sorry.
Okay, it was answered. Two, what is current library square footage? How big is the new space? Would it make sense to have new library, community center, a two-story building? Doesn't add much to cost. So the current library square footage is about 6,300 square feet. The new space, that space indicated on the mass study on the slide you see before you, the total building is 21,000 square feet. Whether or not that is a different size is something that would come out in the design process. We project that the library would require about 45% of whatever the resulting building is. And as we said before, whether it was 1 story or 2 story is something that would come out during the public design process.
Can I just clarify? So in the assumption in that blue box is about 10,000 of that blue box would be for the library.
If we purchase new land at Wake Forest, would it make sense to do recycle center at the same time? I'll defer to the city manager.
Yes, it'll depend. So there's a lot of information out there about the recycle center. And so there'll be some follow-up discussion that is going to come on that. So this is going to be a very gray answer. So yeah, I mean, makes sense to do it at the same time. You got economy of scale. The question that will come down to is operationally, does it make sense to do? Because there's a cost to operate that center. It duplicates curbside services. So it really is going to come down to whether it makes operational sense. But yeah, at the time of construction, if there is a desire to look at that long term, then we would obviously have that planned growth space at that time.
For future landscaping, will we be able to weigh in on having new plants to be native? So I know that the sustainability task force that's currently working is looking at native planting. So I expect that more information regarding that will come out in the near future. But landscaping was not included in this particular project.
No. And so depending on, once again, the sustainability policies that the city implements, if it's xeriscaping, sustainable native plants, those types of things, whatever the policies established from a sustainability standpoint would be incorporated into those facilities. The good part about plantings, they have a shorter life expectancy on some of them, and they can always be updated as those plantings become so. Whether the first one, but we are already looking at that. The Evo Street Pathway Project is looking at native plants to minimize irrigation. There will be irrigation out there, but we're also looking at those drought tolerant plants because that helps lower the operating costs and the maintenance cycle on everything. So that's already in the, and I give you the answer is policy, but we're already in the process of doing that as well.
So those were all of the comment cards that we received this morning. If you have any additional follow-up questions or comments, you can always submit another comment card, or you can email facilitiesplan@westutx.gov, and we'll continue to address those as they come up. The remainder of today's session is unstructured discussion. We have all of the exhibits out in the hallway if you want to take a look at them, and we will also have the architect and staff available if you have any follow-up questions. And thank you again for coming out this morning.
Sure.
The current library that's run by Harris County, but building is ours, is that it, or?
The building is owned by the city and it's operated by Harris County Public Library.
We're the landlord.
Is the church owned by the city?
The church? No, the church is owned by the church. So they have a lot of the gray property you see on the blocks is owned by the church. That white are church parking lots. The city has a shared use agreement, as Jeff mentioned, where it's supposed to be non-competing uses. When we're needing it, they're not. When they need our parking, we're not here. But there's currently 3 residents that are not owned by the church along University. They own the other property on the University, down to College from here. And then they own the house at the corner right by the blue in the middle, by the new library, just south of that smaller tank. And then they own those 3 white lots that are parking on Milton. And then they own 1 house adjacent to where we talked about converting into a parking lot on Rice. So here they own this, they own this, they own that, that one, and that one. And then here, when the city built the police station, this lot is actually owned by the church. The city constructed the parking lot because it serves the benefit during the day for employee parking and stuff like that. So it's an interesting puzzle. But thank you again. And like I said, department heads are here, staff's here to answer any questions, council's here to answer any questions you may have. Feel free, as Will mentioned, if you have follow-up questions when you get home, just shoot them in and we get back to you with an answer. So thank you again.